Position, a privilege to have in studio Bwana James Odongo, who's the Chief Administration Officer at Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. Yeah, and we've had this conversation before, James.
Sure,
yes,
sure.
and it's a very interesting conversation,
Yes.
and I would want you to take us again, kindly, through what KEPRO does and this Extended Producer Responsibility, what exactly it is.
Okay, thank you very much, Fred, for having me. I think for today's conversation, the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization is an organization bringing together visionary leaders within the manufacturing space who are really agreeable to the reality of planet and profit being able to coexist. So ours is a deliberate attempt to try and advance realization of a circular economy in the country by way of instituting environmental and product stewardship programs. And so in the context of extended producer responsibility schemes, just from the name itself, we're extending the responsibility of the producer, and in this case, products that we utilize at our household level. So for KEPRO, we are dealing with the non-hazardous packaging products. So our producers put in place mechanisms to be able to trace the flow of their products through the value chain. So right from production to consumption, and of course at point of disposal, and institute mechanisms to ensure that there's safe disposal for those that are non-recyclable. And those that are recyclable, we put in place infrastructure that is able to ensure proper collection and, of course, reintroduction of the same into the value chain through the recycling processes.
And if you may be kind enough to take us through some of those initiatives that
Yes,
are probably more visible
Yes.
in this whole EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Initiative.
Yes. I think I'll speak back in 2021. And of course, if you remember the backstories, the formation of KEPRO started back in 2017 after the ban of the single-use plastic carrier bags. So the other fractions that we have dealt with that were deemed to be problematic is bread bags. So once you consume your bread, there's a flimsy bag that remains afterwards. We've been able to collect that to the tune of around 16,000 metric tons to date. In terms of visible impact as far as job creation and expansion of the recycling ecosystem, you're looking at creation of more than 12,000 jobs since the start of implementation of EPR in the country. And finally, we've also been able to pump in over 100 million Kenyan shillings through subsidy programs to our recyclers and other waste management operators.
Okay.
Yes.
There was a time there was this conversation about having different dustbins, like three of them in every center, every household, so that you may separate the waste. And I don't know how far we've gone with that.
Okay, not much progress has been made, at least from a practical point of view, but from a legislative or policy point of view, we've seen the National Environment Management Authority coming into the space and trying to, in a way, publish the national color-coded bins. So we've said we are transitioning to biodegradable bags for disposal of waste. And in the notice, they've also said that members of the public will be required to segregate their waste into two bins. So organic waste and the dry waste into separate bins. So in the interim, we are hoping at the end of the notice period, which was lapsing end of this month, that we are going to see a transition towards a maximum of two bins for our disposal of waste.
Okay.
Yes.
So it is the Extended Producer Responsibility Program. But you're saying you're talking about the consumer too. That means the consumer has something to do with it.
Sure.
What is it that the consumer has to do?
So as KEPRO, we believe that the consumer is actually the primary stakeholder within the waste ecosystem, because the reality is, as long as Fred is improperly disposing of their waste and not placing it in the right bin, there's only so much we can do, even however much money we are able to pump into the system, however much bins we are going to be able to provide. So for us, we are very deliberate on giving the consumer the agency feeling that they actually have a role to play as far as environmental stewardship is concerned. So giving them that knowledge on proper disposal of waste, recognizing and appreciating that really improper dumping of waste also has an environmental effect as far as climate change is concerned. So sharing them all this information and also recognizing and giving them that cognizance that you can actually generate wealth and jobs from waste disposal. So really sharing that information So actually earlier this year, and I think I'd mentioned this earlier, is that we launched what we are calling the Consumer-Led Transformation Initiative, where we are giving the consumer that prominence to appreciate and recognize that really the waste conversation starts with you. Okay. It is not the government, it is not the private sector. It's really about you properly disposing of that waste, and then we are actually able to generate revenue.
And some may wonder how this knowledge is imparted, because probably they've not encountered this kind of communication from EPR.
Yes.
As far as the consumer is concerned, what kind of initiatives are you using to actually impart this knowledge on the consumers?
Okay, of course, one of them is what we are doing right now, trying to leverage on the media as a mouthpiece. You guys have the power to be able to reach more masses compared to KEPRO trying to use its own means. So use of both digital and mainstream media platforms is one critical platform we are using. The other approach we are trying to use is the use of social dialogues. So instituting mechanisms to be able to put together groups of people, whether it's residents associations, members of the public really who might not be affiliated to any body per se, and bring them in one room. So apart from cascading to them the information from an awareness point of view, but also triggering them to understand really what is the challenge, why are we actually dealing with waste at our neighborhood level, so how can we be able to get solutions. And through that we are also now seeing neighborhoods coming up with adaptive solutions that are relevant and can be able to work within their jurisdictions, as opposed to trying to borrow something that might not necessarily work within their spaces.
Okay.
Yes.
And as usual, in such conversations about sustainability, many manufacturers are always accused of just doing things for the feel-good effect. And to say, even as we do it. Are there legal frameworks or policy frameworks that safeguard and ensure that this is actually happening sustainably? And is there data to actually prove that this is happening?
Yes. So we must also be appreciative of the fact that extended producer responsibility is still a relatively new concept within the Global South. It was predominantly a Global North initiative. So in Africa, we've seen the uptake of EPR in the last 2 years. So in South Africa, it was made mandatory in 2021. We've seen Ghana, Nigeria also coming into place and putting EPR legislation. In Kenya, the Act came into place in 2022. So Section 13 of the Sustainable Waste Management Act is introducing extended producer responsibility as a mandatory requirement for all products coming into the Kenyan space. So that in itself is documented and is now a regulatory requirement that all producers must be able to comply with. So in terms of statistics, we'd also want to be safe and argue that EPR is still new. So we've only started implementation and enforcement last year in 2023. So we are still at the very formative stages. But just to also give you statistics, we were trying to document the impact that we've made so far within the landscape of EPR, not necessarily limiting it to successes of KEPRO. But as I've mentioned, we've seen and have a record of around 12,000 jobs being created based on the monies we've been able to pump into the ecosystem. So we're able to see waste management operators being able to expand their facilities to accommodate more waste. And through that, we're also now seeing more waste being recycled. So besides the statistics around what KEPRO has been able to do, you're talking about around 16,000 metric tons. Other producer responsibility organizations also have significant volumes. So one such entity is the electronic producer responsibility organization, who we've also seen coming into place and trying to tackle waste, which has never been done before. From a legislative point of view. Okay. Yes.
But all this comes at a cost. You talked about expansion, you talked about the labor that is used on this, and one may wonder, who pays for this? Who bears the cost?
Yes. Yeah. So in layman terms, we call it the polluter pay principle, where the producer in this case is deemed as a polluter, and they have to contribute to a kitting. So KEPRO is the kitty. Where we are saying, and just to take you back, the Sustainable Waste Management Act, as much as it's saying producers must comply with EPR, it gives them option. So using a very close example, if TV47 was a producer, and TV47 has the capacity to be able to reach all the 47 counties, establish networks with the waste management operators and the likes, then you can institute individual compliance schemes. Nevertheless, this has always been discouraged because it's not only expensive, but TV47 might primarily be a media station, so does not necessarily understand the schematics around waste management. So that is why you are given the option of collective compliance schemes such as the KEPRO. So members of KEPRO, so currently we represent around 850 members. The KEPRO members contribute a certain levy to our kitties, which we are now able to manage and administer the compliance scheme on their behalf.
Okay.
So they make payments based on the volumes they are putting out into the market per month.
Okay.
Yes.
And that contribution is conclusive and enough to actually ensure sustainability of this initiative?
In the interim, not yet, given that we are yet to crystallize the schematics around implementation of EPR. So we have the Act, and you know, in Kenya, the Act can only be operationalized with the regulations. So we still don't have the EPR regulations, and so we are in a voluntary ecosystem where really members can only be able to contribute as much, and then recognizing that we're in a difficult macro and microeconomic environment, we are currently charging what we deem affordable and trying to get the buy-in of the producers. But ultimately the intention is to have a pricing that is sustainable in the long run, and producers can actually be able to sustain implementation of EPR.
Okay.
Yes.
If we look at the Finance Bill 2024,
yes,
there is a proposed eco-levy imposed on imported finished products that contribute to e-waste, and it is said that they harm the environment. And one wonders, with this money that you're collecting towards EPR, extended producer responsibility, and then eco-levy on the other side, one, isn't it double taxation for producers? And how does it impact on your work as KEPRO?
Okay, so just also, as far as we know, is that there's been some revision. The initial draft was actually imposing on actually even raw materials, the eco-levy on raw materials. But of course, through lobbying and a lot of advocacy by different actors, we've seen that revised to affect the imported finished goods. But just to also, and back to your question, is that EPR and eco-levy are almost speaking the same language, where it's almost a replica of what we wanted to, EPR is trying to achieve. Because the wording of the eco-levy is that it is supposed to take care of the unintended consequences of products being introduced into the Kenyan market. Nevertheless, literally, that is what the EPR is trying to do. And so the idea, as you've rightly put it, pundits would have argued that it would have amounted to double taxation. We are grateful that that has been revised, because it was going to affect the competitiveness of Kenyan products in the East African region, because the compounding effect was going to see some products get to up to a rise in prices by up to 70%. So if you add, say, the edible oils, there was a suggested 25% increase in terms of excise duty, the removal of offsetting of excise duty and the likes. The incremental increase was getting to about 70% on certain products in terms of consumption. So in terms of the eco-levy tax, yes, it's going to affect implementation of EPR. It's potentially a double taxation by all standards. So the current framing around the imported finished goods, that is also still debatable, because really what might be deemed imported finished goods according to you is not really the case, because maybe there's a bit of value addition coming to be done locally before it is introduced into the Kenyan market. So we're also really keeping an eye on that to see how the regulations will be developed for us to be able to understand the granular bits around how that will be implemented. So apart from the eco-levy and of course now alluding to the finance bill in general, there's also a separate introduction that is, or rather proposal that is affecting our industry, where we are saying, or rather the government, the National Treasury is proposing the removal of VAT exemption from really for people who are importing machinery and equipment for recycling of plastic materials. So it's quite counterproductive that on one end, you're charging 150 shillings. Really, that's 150,000 shillings per ton to producers in the name of trying to tackle the environmental impact of their products. But then on this other hand, you are really suppressing the emergence of a new economy in the form of recycling facilities by removing the VAT exemption.
Okay.
Yes.
And one wonders the kind of relationship that KEPRO has with the government. How do you work? How is that system?
So of course ours is a collaborative initiative, because the reality is the national government is a draft of the regulations. The county governments are the implementers as far as devolved government units are concerned, with respect to the functions of waste management. So we have to work together. So we are sort of a cog in the wheel, where we are bringing together private sector, government into one room and having a conversation on waste management. So we work closely. The National Environment Management Authority is our regulator. And of course now we also have to work in terms of even our EPR plan submissions. We have to demonstrate that we are actually trying to work with all the 47 counties.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think that if at all the eco levy as proposed would
Yes.
have gone through, or
Yes.
should go through,
Yes.
how would it impact, whether positive or negatively, your work as
Yes.
KEPRO?
Of
Is it
course.
something that could actually come and give you impetus, probably?
By all standards, no. In the initial draft, we were looking at potentially losing over 12,000 jobs. Of course, a
It
reversal.
will shut you down.
Yes, yes. First, as KEPRO, shutting us down, but even the waste management operators that have increasingly invested in the recycling economy would also have to shut down, because you're not only affecting their feedstock in terms of the cost of the packaging would have really been high and discouraged purchase of products. So that means the resultant waste resulting from these products would not get to them, which is their feedstock to be able to operate their machinery.
But isn't that the intention, that reduce this kind of material, hazardous material?
The idea is that we must also really shy away from the conversation on arguing that plastic is hazardous material. Because the reality is it meets a certain pent-up demand. We can't be able to package certain products without the use of plastic. And research has shown that you can't ultimately do away with plastic, because there are really no alternatives per se. So the best solution is manage it.
Okay.
So ours is to push for management as opposed to actual elimination, which will result to job losses and the likes. And really, some of these ideas are usually not well thought through. Taking you back to the idea of the biodegradable bin liners, we have not seen any public participation or consultation around the policy before even the notice came out. So we actually run the risk of introducing a new product that is worse than what we are doing away with, which is the normal plastic.
Wow.
So the biodegradable bin liners that are being recommended, there are no publicly shared standards in terms of quality standards that are going to be used to ensure that we are not actually introducing substandard material that would potentially biodegrade into microplastic, which is more dangerous compared to the traditional plastic fraction.
Okay.
Yes.
As we wrap up this interview, what is your biggest concern going forward in this discussion of sustainability in waste management?
Yes, yes. The biggest worry for us is, and challenge for that matter, still goes back to the consumer. I think as much effort as we would want to put in place as far as pumping money into the ecosystem is concerned, as long as the consumer is still not really aware of their responsibility, then there's only so much we can be able to achieve. So ours is to try and work together with the consumers through different platforms, as I said, whether it's on social dialogues, working closely with the Kenya Association of Waste Recyclers for the capacity building of waste management operators, and of course the Kenya Alliance of Residents Association, to try and cascade as much as possible this information to members of the public on the need to properly dispose of waste, and also of course ensuring that we are separating waste at source to be able to build up our recycling infrastructure in the country.
All right, anything more to add?
Really mine is a call to action to all members of the public. I know we're in the midst of this whole finance bill, but we also must remember that we are also environmental stewards of our earth, because the reality is we cannot assume that somebody else will take care of our earth. It's you and I. So my clarion call today is your waste is your responsibility. Even as we are saying, rejecting finance bill is your responsibility, your waste is also your responsibility.
All right.
Yes, yes.
James Odongo, Chief Administrative Officer, Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO, that works with the management of solid waste and manufacturers who produce this, and how this waste is managed beyond the consumption phase. You're watching Morning Cafe. Time for a break. We'll be back with more. Thank you so much.